Hello, True Health Seekers, and welcome to another exciting episode of the Learn True Health podcast. This is going to be a fun one. We have an amazing doctor on, Dr. Nathan Bryan. He has over 20 years of experience in studying nitric oxide. I first heard about nitric oxide in my interview with Dr. Esselstyn when he talks about how he took, I believe it was 24 or 26 patients who are on their deathbed. Their cardiologist had basically said, "We've given you everything, go home to die. There's nothing we can do for you. Your heart disease is so far gone. You are moments away from death." And Dr. Esselstyn took these people, put them on a whole food plant-based diet, put them on foods that significantly increase nitric oxide in the body, and they all bounced back, and it was absolutely amazing. And of course, he went on to publish this and publish other studies and then write his book, How to Reverse and Prevent Heart Disease. So when I heard about how he used certain foods like leafy greens and balsamic, and you can do some really delicious things. There's some really delicious balsamics out there. I particularly love this one balsamic. And I'm not a fan of like that strong vinegar taste, but this balsamic doesn't taste like that at all. It has a hint of maple and fig to it. It's so delicious. And you use that and cover your cooked vegetables, your steamed vegetables, and that increases nitric oxide. And there's other foods that we talk about in today's interview where you will learn how to increase nitric oxide naturally in the body and why it is the key to preventing and reversing disease and anti-aging. Now, Dr. Nathan Bryan does talk about a product that he's developed, and I'm really excited that he did. And he's also developed a few pharmaceuticals that increase nitric oxide that have they're doing studies, they're doing trials, and they've saved people's lives in the ER. So that is very exciting. So of course we want to prevent ourselves from ever needing to be in the ER in the first place by increasing nitric oxide naturally. And then he also developed a supplement that can help you as well. And he talks about that. And he also developed, which I think is really interesting, a skincare line, because nitric oxide, when put on the skin, cures things like rosacea and fine lines and wrinkles, and helps forces oxygen, pushes oxygen into these newly constructed cells, so they then appear younger and younger and healthier. And I have rosacea. My grandmother had it. My mom had some. And so I always thought it was just, part of the women in my family. And I've been using the cream, and first of all, I love it. It's very high quality, and I'm really liking it. And I'm noticing that my rosacea is starting to get better, which I thought that was really interesting. So I am noticing I'm now eating more foods with nitric oxide. I'm knowing, wow, I've got more energy. This is great. I can't wait to put it really to the test and do some heavy hiking this summer. But what I have noticed by using his products since I did the interview is I have seen a difference, and that's really exciting. And he does say some things that I think are really important to take to heart and to share with everyone you love, especially when he talks about there's certain habits that we have that can decrease your nitric oxide so much that they're significantly important in increasing heart disease. So we want to make sure that none of our friends and family are doing these activities that are noted to decrease nitric oxide in the body, which increases heart disease and shortens people's lifespans. So this is going to be an episode you're going to want to share with everyone. I've already told so many of my friends, I can't wait for you guys to listen to this episode, because if you guys just follow the simple tools that he gives you today, the simple lifestyle habits that he gives you today, you're going to increase your nitric oxide, and you're going to substantially be able to increase the quality of your life as a result. So definitely want to share this with your friends and family. Thank you so much for being a listener of the show. And if you're interested in getting any of his products, including his book, including Dr. Nathan Bryan's book, you can go to his website, which is N101.com. That's the chemical formula for nitric oxide. So it's N, the letter N, 1, the number 1, and then the letter O, the number 1.com. And of course, use the coupon code LTH, as in Learn True Health. The coupon code LTH will give you a discount. I made sure that my wonderful listeners were going to get a great discount when they went to the website to buy Dr. Nathan Bryan's book or his nitric oxide based a skincare line or his special supplement, which increases nitric oxide in the body. And of course, the links to everything that Dr. Nathan Bryan does is going to be in the show notes of today's podcast at learntruehealth.com. And come join the Facebook group so we can talk about all this stuff after you listen to the episode. I can't wait to hear from you guys in the Learn True Health Facebook group. And I'm just so grateful that we're here today to be able to learn together and grow together. We're on a health journey together to learn true health. And I'm glad you're here. Have yourself a fantastic rest of your day and enjoy today's interview. Welcome to the Learn True Health podcast. I'm your host, Ashley James. This is episode 478. I am so excited for today's guest. This topic is going to be so cool. I love geeking out with the science. Dr. Nathan Bryan. I, just got introduced to you recently, and I'm surprised I haven't heard of you sooner because we kind of navigate the same circles. Chef AJ, who I've had on the show a few times, and I just absolutely love her. She introduced me to you. She introduced you to me. And man, I'm thrilled to just dive into what you're doing, especially this idea that we can heal the endothelial lining of our cardiovascular system, that we can lower blood pressure naturally. My husband had to be, at one point in his life, he had to be on two blood pressure meds, in fact. And it was, and considering we go to a naturopathic physician and we do all this healthy stuff, it was kind of a shock. But he had chronic blood pressure problems his whole life. And we finally were addressing it. And his doctor's like, listen, you've tried all this other stuff. Let's just get you on meds. And meds only lowered it about 8 points. Like, it wasn't anything substantial, and yet there's all these side effects that happen, and it lowers your life expectancy the more meds you're on. So you've got, and I don't know if that's exact direct causation, but I do know that medication makes the body have to burn through its nutrient stores faster, right? It burdens the body to have to metabolize drugs, and so there's this give and take. But here we have a population. 1/3 of the population is obese, pre-diabetic, or diabetic. Heart disease is one of the top, killers, along with cancer, and of course the statistics now. Cancer is on the rise, and so we have. It's like, well, it's the roulette of what do you want to suffer from, the last 20 years of your life: diabetes, cancer, heart disease. But that's if we go with the flow. That's if we eat the standard American diet. We watch mainstream media, and we do what everyone else is doing, and we follow Hollywood basically, and we just follow the mainstream media diet and agenda, and we do what everyone else is doing. Go to the doctor, just let them throw prescriptions at you, and if you just go with the flow, you're guaranteed to be a statistic. Now you're going against the grain, and you've figured out a way to help people to lower blood pressure naturally, heal their heart, and prevent disease in a really exciting way. And so I'm just bubbling. I'm so excited. Welcome to the show. I can't wait for our listeners to learn how we can take control of our health with the latest science that you're involved in. So welcome.
Thank you, Ashley. It's a great pleasure to be with you.
Absolutely. Well, let's start by hearing about you, your story, and what led you to decipher this information.
Well, life's a journey, right? And so it's I think the longer I live, the more clear and the more I realize how little influence I had in this. I think God puts people in our lives at certain points and, forces us to pivot. And some of the grand plans we have when we're early out, starting in our career, is not where we end up. But I live with no regrets, and, everything that's happened, the good and the bad, got us to where we are today. But, I grew up in small town Texas. I went to the University of Texas at Austin, where I got a degree in biochemistry, had an opportunity to do undergraduate research there, and really fell in love with discovery. I mean, that was a time in the early 90s when we were overexpressing protein and bacteria, and then isolating those proteins, and then being able to do structure function analysis and try to figure out how does an intact protein work and what goes wrong in certain diseases. So then after a degree in biochemistry, bachelor's degree in biochemistry, the job market isn't that great. So I knew I had to go out and extend my education. So I went to LSU School of Medicine, where I got a PhD in molecular and cellular physiology. And it was there I was introduced to nitric oxide. It was the early 2000s, right after a Nobel Prize was awarded for its discovery. And so that's when I just really got entrenched in the science of nitric oxide. We knew it was important, but at that time there were no methods to detect nitric oxide in biological systems. And there was very little known about the science of, what goes wrong in people that can't make it, and, what are the clinical symptoms of such. And there certainly weren't any knowledge or science around how do you create or recreate nitric oxide in the human body. So that was an exciting time. We developed some methods that allowed us to detect nitric oxide in biological samples, whether it's in blood or tissue biopsies. Filed a number of, or published a number of papers during that time. And then I left there and went to the Boston University Medical Center in obviously Boston at the Whitaker Cardiovascular Institute, where I did a fellowship in cardiology and vascular biology. And again, had some pretty profound discoveries. And from there, I kind of made a name for myself as a young investigator, and was recruited to join faculty at the University of Texas Medical School in Houston by Fred Murad, who was the department chair then, and he was one of the gentlemen who shared the Nobel Prize. So there I found a home, because it was a nitric oxide-centric department at the Institute of Molecular Medicine. And for the first couple of years, all I did was, do experiments and try to enable patents, because at that point, we had enough information and we had the methods available that I could figure out and basically produce nitric oxide in biological systems. So for the first 2 years, I did nothing but experiments and filed patents through the University of Texas. Those patents soon issued thereafter. And then, then the next stage of my career was really to make sure that those discoveries and technology saw the light of day. So I retired from full-time academia in 2015, and I've been an entrepreneur since, and formed a number of companies to commercialize our nitric oxide technology. And so my objective today is to introduce nitric oxide-based product technology in every major market segment around the world, including drug therapy, where we have drugs in phase 3 clinical trials for COVID. We've got some drug applications going in for ischemic heart disease, some topical drugs for diabetic ulcers. And the exciting thing is nitric oxide does so much and is so important in human disease that there's really no indication that we could not go after for any type of drug therapy. So that's kind of the 20-year story in 2 minutes or less.
So maybe let's back it up to the basics for someone who's never heard of the term nitric oxide. Why is it so important? What does it do? Why is it so exciting that you've been able to figure out a way to increase it in the human body?
Well, it was discovered about 30 years ago, so it's still a new discovery in kind of the medical sciences. But it's a signaling molecule. It's how cells in the body communicate with one another. It's mostly recognized as a vasodilator, meaning that it dilates the blood vessels throughout the body, and it increases oxygen and nutrient delivery. But it's a neurotransmitter in the central nervous system. Our immune cells actually generate nitric oxide to prevent virus from replicating and proliferating throughout the body. It shuts down bacterial respiration. So it's part of our host defense. So understanding that and all that nitric oxide does, it really becomes obvious then if you lose the ability to produce nitric oxide, which occurs as we age and really dependent upon diet and lifestyle, that a lot of bad things happen. You lose the regulation of blood flow. You can no longer dilate blood vessels, so you develop sexual dysfunction. You develop vascular dementia. You develop high blood pressure, which 2 out of 3 Americans have an unsafe elevation in blood pressure. You develop you become immunocompromised. So if you're exposed to a virus like coronavirus or like the flu, you get sick from it, and you develop neurological disease. So our thought was, and the science was very clear at the time, that the older you get, the less nitric oxide you make, and that is what's responsible for age-related disease, including cardiovascular disease, the #1 killer of men and women worldwide. So that's what the science has told us over the past 20 years. But kind of the missing part was, okay, the science is clear, but how do you fix it? And that's kind of been my contribution to the field, is that we figured out how to develop a shelf-stable, solid form of nitric oxide. And perhaps I'll take a step back, because maybe your listeners don't realize that nitric oxide is a gas. So it's produced in the lining of the blood vessels, and when this gas is produced, it's gone in less than a second. So to be able to develop drug therapy or any type of product technology that's shelf-stable, that recapitulates nitric oxide signaling in the human body, has been very, very challenging. In fact, big pharmaceuticals companies have tried to do this for the past 30 years. They've been largely unsuccessful. But through our research program and kind of thinking differently, thinking outside the box, we figured this out and now have I think over 24 issued patents. So our claim to fame is we know how to make nitric oxide, and that's extremely valuable and profound in the way that I think that people are going to be healed over the next 40, 50 years.
The first time I heard about nitric oxide was when I interviewed Dr. Cadwell Esselstyn. And I'm sure you know of his work. He's also a friend with Chef AJ. He came on the show and he explained that he takes people who are basically at death's door. Their doctors have given up on them. They have multiple clogs in their heart. They're even too sick for bypass surgery. The doctors say just go home and to die. And then that's unfortunately when people usually find Cadwell Esselstyn and his book, How to Reverse and Prevent Heart Disease. And he gets them on a whole food plant-based diet, no salt, sugar, oil, incredibly strict. But he lately has added a factor, which is he has them every few hours, like every 4 hours. He has them eat a bowl of steamed greens, just any kind of leafy green. There's like 12 of them. Pick a leafy green, steam it, and then cover it in as much balsamic as you want, any kind of balsamic. There's all kinds of flavors out there. And he says that balsamic vinegar and greens increase, but especially balsamic vinegar, increase nitric oxide and help heal the endothelial lining of the cardiovascular system. And I thought that was fascinating. And then I heard it again when I watched the movie, The Game Changers, where they sort of follow these athletes that, like these Olympic athletes who have gone plant-based. And there's this one woman who I think she was 29 or 30 years old, and she was beating people almost half her age, beating women almost half her age. And she won the gold in cycling at an almost age 30, which is like an 80-year-old beating a 40-year-old in a marathon, right? And so, so she said that her biggest thing was like beets, because beets before and after exercise would increase the nitric oxide and help with lactic acid clearance. And she found her recovery to be faster, and she had her endurance was higher up just by eating whole food plant-based, avoiding salt, sugar, and oil, and making sure she's getting enough beets and enough greens in her diet. So I'm hearing that there's certain nutrients the body loves in order to make nitric oxide. So are there certain nutrients? Because you said that as we age, we make less. Is it because we're older, like our telomeres are shorter, or is it because as we age, we've beat up our body so much that now it's just like failing us, and we're not eating healthy, we're not eating enough nutrients? Like, what is it about aging that has us make less? And is it really about age, or is it about lifestyle and diet?
Well, those are very good questions, and I'm good friends with Dr. Esselstyn, and he's made enormous contributions to medicine. But his observations are what led them through that, being able to reverse heart disease. And then it was our science that basically provided a mechanism for his observation. So to understand this age-related loss of nitric oxide production, there's two ways the body makes nitric oxide. There's one, the first one to be discovered was an enzyme called nitric oxide synthase, and that's the enzyme that's found in our endothelial cells, and that's what produces nitric oxide like every second upon need, when you need to increase blood flow. For instance, if you're trying to remember where you parked your car, part of memory recall is you've got to increase blood flow to the prefrontal cortex to recall memory. And if you can't dilate the blood vessels to get improved blood flow and perfusion to that area, then you develop cognitive disorders, you become forgetful. Same thing if you want to perform sexually. You've got to dilate those blood vessels to get engorgement, to get increased blood flow. If you can't make nitric oxide, then you can't. So that's the pathway that becomes more compromised the older we get. And the biochemistry and the enzymology is well understood that it's basically due to an oxidation of a molecule called tetrahydrobiopterin, or BH4, that leads to enzyme uncoupling and endothelial dysfunction. So that is what we lose with age. Now, the other pathway, which Dr. Esselstyn exploits, is that you can use diet through green leafy vegetables. And then there's a molecule called nitrate. It's inorganic nitrate. It's found primarily in dark green leafy vegetables. And when you consume those, about 90 minutes after you consume, say, spinach or beets or kale or any green leafy vegetable, that is concentrated, that nitrate is taken up in our gut and put in our salivary glands. And this has been known since the late 70s. And then each time we salivate now for the next 5 or 6 hours, we're secreting nitrate in our saliva, in our oral cavity. And then under normal conditions, we have nitrate-reducing bacteria that live on the crypts of the tongue in our mouth. And then these bacteria reduce the nitrate to nitrite and nitric oxide. And this happens for the next 6 or 8 hours. And then when we swallow our own saliva, it's enriched then in nitrite. Nitrite becomes nitric oxide as long as there's stomach acid being produced. So Dr. Esselstyn's very correct in the fact that if you eat green leafy vegetables and put balsamic vinegar, which is basically acetic acid, so you're acidifying the lumen of the stomach to allow for that nitric oxide being produced when it's broken down by the bacteria and then digested in your stomach. So mechanistically, that's how it's designed to work. The problem is that if you're using mouthwash to kill the bacteria in your mouth because of bad breath or just because of habit, then you disrupt this pathway. Or if you're using antacids to prevent stomach acid production, you shut down nitric oxide production. And this was really kind of the epiphany when I first had a conversation with Dr. Esselstyn, because just like with any clinician, you have patients that get better and you use the same protocol on another patient and they don't get better. So why is it that one patient responds beautifully and the other patient doesn't respond at all? And the explanation for that is he goes, Nathan, I've never asked my patients if they're using mouthwash. Or I've never asked my patients that I put on a plant-based diet if they're using antacids. Because clearly, if they are, then that plant-based diet is not going to work for them because there's no nitric oxide being produced by that plant-based diet. So that was kind of the epiphany to him, and I think to a lot of people, is because it's the microbiome, right? A lot of people are focused on the microbiome of the gut and how important that is, but very few people beside us ever focused on the oral microbiome. And so just as like if there's dysbiosis in the gut, you get symptoms in human disease. If there's dysbiosis in the mouth, you become nitric oxide deficient. And there's clear evidence now, we've published on it and a number of others, that people who use mouthwash have higher blood pressure than those who don't.
What?
And if there's clear
oh my gosh.
associations. And we've also, published on the fact that if we take normotensive, healthy people, and the only thing we do, we don't change their diet, don't change any other aspect about them, we just give them mouthwash twice a day for 7 days. In some patients, we see as much as a 26 millimeter increase in their blood pressure in 1 week.
Wow.
And that's just the effects on blood pressure. There's also evidence now that if people use mouthwash and exercise, you lose the cardioprotective benefits of exercise. I mean, that is earth-shattering because people, I think for the most part, people try to do the right thing with good intentions. They exercise, they eat a plant-based diet. They've been told by their dentist at some point in life that they should use mouthwash to keep gum disease and gingivitis away. So they use mouthwash. But yet, when they do that, they eliminate the benefits of their diet, they eliminate the benefits of exercise, and they're basically putting themselves at risk for advanced progression of cardiovascular disease. So tell people 200 million Americans use mouthwash every day, and 200 million Americans have an unsafe elevation in blood pressure. That's not a coincidence. There's a clear causal relationship between the oral bacteria and steady state blood pressure.
Okay.
So if you're using mouthwash, you have to stop.
I want to back up and just unpack that, because I'm kind of in shock, and I know my listeners are too. So you said that if you don't have the microbiome in your mouth, and you exercise, you're losing the cardiovascular protection of nitric oxide. I'm a little confused though. I thought you said that it was also produced in the endothelial lining. So if you don't have the bacteria in your mouth, does that mean your endothelial lining of the cardiovascular system doesn't produce it, or it's just it's that you're getting less because the bacteria also produces it?
Well, we thought early on, probably 15 years ago, that these were two mutually exclusive events. They were completely separated. So one could compensate for the other. And I think that's why young kids can get away with not eating a lot of vegetables or a good diet, because they have good endothelial function, and that endothelial function, or the nitric oxide that's produced in the lining of the blood vessel, can compensate and overcome from a lack of a good diet. But the older you get, the older we get, the less functional our endothelium becomes, the less nitric oxide we make. So then we have to compensate from that through the diet. But the evidence pointing to the fact, because the benefits of exercise are an improvement in endothelial function. But the issue is, if you're kind of in moderately good shape and you begin to exercise, that creates some shear stress in that skeletal muscle, whether it's in the legs if you're running or biking, or if it's in the biceps if you're doing curls. That tells the muscle, I need more oxygen and nutrient being delivered because you're working me harder. And so the only way to do that, especially in the heart, is to dilate the blood vessels. The only way to dilate the blood vessels is through production of nitric oxide. So if your body can make sufficient nitric oxide, it does. And then there's an adaptive response where it actually improves the ability. So you're stressing your body, and your body goes, oh, I need to up my game because I need to be ready for the next stressful event. So there's an improvement in nitric oxide. The problem is when you have endothelial dysfunction, like older patients who are have chest pain or shortness of breath, they go into the cardiologist and they put them on a treadmill, hook them up with some leads on an EKG, and as they increase the workload, if the coronary arteries can't produce nitric oxide to dilate the coronary arteries, then that heart becomes hypoxic because it can't increase the oxygen delivery to meet the increased metabolic demand, and there's changes in electrical activity. So they fail an exercise stress test. So your ability to produce nitric oxide predicts how well you can perform.
Oh, wow.
So now there's a clear association between if you're using mouthwash, there's an association with endothelial dysfunction. And so you're losing the protective benefits of exercise. And there's a bit of an explanation on that, because when you produce nitric oxide, it's oxidized almost immediately to nitrite and nitrate. And then your body's the biomarkers we look at are plasma levels of nitrite and nitrate. So when you're exercising, and that's where things like beetroot extract or titrating up your nitric oxide levels prior to sports performance, because when oxygen is needed to make nitric oxide in the lining of the blood vessel. And so when you reach that anaerobic threshold and oxygen becomes limiting, your nitric oxide production stops from the enzyme that makes nitric oxide. But if you've created a pool of nitrite because you've generated a lot of nitric oxide prior to that anaerobic threshold, then nitrite under those low oxygen conditions actually generates nitric oxide. Ooh. In an enzyme independent manner.
How I'm sorry. How does your body? So your body is taking the nitrite, and then in an anaerobic state, turning it into nitric oxide.
That's right. So what happens is the pKa of nitrite's about 3.4, and so they're mammalian enzymes that specifically, as the pH of the muscle decreases or the tissue decreases, that nitrite becomes nitric oxide. So then, what does that nitric oxide do? It does a lot of things. Number one, it binds to cytochrome C oxidase of mitochondria so that you get oxygen diffusing further into tissue, and you push that anaerobic threshold back so you get less lactic acid buildup. You can actually oxygenate that tissue to where you can turn the nitric oxide back on. And so it's a self-feeding or feed-forward mechanism, but all that's dependent upon your steady-state levels of nitrite and your ability to titrate up these nitrite stores prior to reaching that anaerobic threshold.
Now, we don't need to like go out and get smoked bacon that has potassium nitrite in it to get our nitrites. You know, it's a different kind of nitrite and nitrates. You know, I've always thought if people knew what they put in deli meat to preserve the meat so the meat didn't look gray, and how it affects the kidneys and how it affects the circulation in the body, that they would not eat that. Those preservatives in that state is not what you're talking about. Can you explain how do we help the body to where are we getting the nitrate from when you say our food? Is it more leafy greens? Is that the best thing to do and the beet to get it from our food? Is that the best source?
Well, so there's been a misconception, and I know this may not be surprising to your listenership, but the media and big pharma has not always told the truth.
What?
In terms of what's what's good for us and what's bad for us. So the nitrate that's found in green leafy vegetables is the exact same molecule they use to cure bacon or hot dogs. So there are a lot of other preservatives in those cured and processed meats that probably aren't good for you, but nitrate and nitrite are protective. And if you think about the science of curing, what are they doing? Well, you're preventing lipid oxidation. Well, that's pretty important in human physiology. So nitrite does that. That's why they add it to cured and processed meat. It prevents listeria, clostridium, a lot of these foodborne pathogens. Well, that's pretty important in human physiology if you can prevent bacterial outbreaks. And then it binds to the iron of myoglobin and turns it this nice pink color. Well, it does the same thing to hemoglobin. It binds to hemoglobin, allows oxygen to be delivered throughout the body. So the same chemistry that's involved in meat curing is the same chemistry that we're utilizing in human physiology to prevent oxidative stress, to prevent inflammation, and to improve oxygen delivery to a working muscle. So here's where the misconception came. And I don't deny the data on the fact that there's an increased relative risk of people who eat cured and processed meats and a slight increase in risk of certain gastrointestinal cancers. So that's called an association, but it's certainly not causation. In order for you to establish causation, you have to have a biologically plausible mechanism that explains that observation. And so in the 1960s and early 70s, they go, oh, well, it has to be nitrite and nitrate in the cured and processed meats because those form nitrosamines, and then nitrosamines cause cancer. So there's their biologically plausible mechanism. Well, that stood for about 40 years until the discovery of nitric oxide. And then it was realized, oh, well, nitrite and nitrate are actually produced endogenously. Why would our body naturally produce carcinogens? And then the national government, the National Institute of Health, the Department of Health and Human Safety did long-term safety studies on nitrite and nitrate in our food supply. And what they found, this was the National Toxicology Program, the gold standard in toxicology. They did dose escalations for both nitrite and nitrate in male and female mice, rats, and rabbits. You know what they found? They prevented cancer. They didn't cause cancer.
Wow.
Actually, in many cases, prevented cancer. And so that story began to fall apart. And then if that were true, because 85% of the nitrate and nitrite exposure we get from our diet is from green leafy vegetables. Only 5% comes from cured and processed meats. The other 10% comes from swallowing our own saliva.
Wow, 10%.
10%, because of the nitric oxide that's produced endogenously, is oxidized to nitrate. That nitrate, the body doesn't discriminate the nitrate that comes from spinach versus that which is formed from enzymatic NO production. So then our body puts the nitrate in our salivary glands. We salivate. It's produced. It generates nitrite. We swallow the nitrite. It becomes nitric oxide gas. So if that were the case, vegetarians or people who ate a plant-based diet would have about a 10-time higher incidence of cancer and heart disease than non-vegetarians. And we know it's just the opposite.
Right. If nitrates and nitrites were the cause.
That's right.
Right. So interesting though. We want the benefits that you're talking about having plentiful amounts, adequate enough amount what the body needs, as much nitric oxide as the body needs, right?
Right.
We want that, and it doesn't sound like we'd get it from eating a lot of cured meats. You might get, like you said, 5%, and you're not getting all the benefits of all the other nutrients that come from eating plants. And you said that there's a significant percentage when you eat plants versus the cured meats. But also really important, 10% is from your oral health, and having a healthy microbiome in your mouth and not using mouthwash. Man, it makes me think about people who are on antibiotics, and if that's wiped out that good bacteria, and now they've immediately wiped out 10% of their nitric oxide production. I knew you'd blow my mind in this interview, and we're just warming up. I only knew really about the vasodilation, and that's why I was excited. I knew that it also helped, like, I didn't know why, but I knew that people reported that it helped with endurance and recovery, so it helped lower lactic acid buildup, and the vasodilation, which is so important. But can you talk a bit more about the signaling of it, these new discoveries about how nitric oxide is used to help the parts of the body signal and talk to each other?
Right. Well, one of the most, I think, profound discoveries and realization in nitric oxide signaling was in 2015 when Jonathan Stamler, a good friend and colleague out of Case Western, published a paper that revealed that nitric oxide is required for oxygen delivery. So part of its signaling, so nitric oxide can bind to metals, or it can activate second messenger systems, but it can also bind to thiols on proteins. These are the sulfur-containing amino acids on proteins. And so in oxygen delivery, we know that when you breathe, right, we're picking up oxygen and we're exhaling CO2. And then when the red blood cells go from the arterial side to the venous side through the capillaries, that they release oxygen. And that's where oxygen and CO2 exchange occur in the very small blood vessels. But in order for oxygen to come off hemoglobin, nitric oxide has to be bound. If you don't have nitric oxide bound to hemoglobin, then it doesn't undergo that structural change. It's what's called the Bohr effect, and oxygen doesn't come off. And this became obvious and apparent over the last 2 years in COVID, because the problem with COVID is loss of blood oxygen saturation. They become hypoxemic. Then you go and put them on oxygen. If they don't improve their oxygen saturation, they put them on a ventilator. 90% of the people that are put on a ventilator die. Mm-hmm. That's the root cause of COVID. You know, in 2020, we got an investigational new drug application approved by the FDA to where we started our nitric oxide drug in phase 3 clinical trials for COVID. And now we're seeing the importance of nitric oxide in oxygen uptake and oxygen delivery. Because now in our drug study, we're seeing COVID patients that get really sick, that get blood oxygen saturation, below 80, sometimes in their high 70s. Typically that patient would be put on a vent immediately. But they take our nitric oxide drug, and within 8 minutes, we see blood oxygen saturation go to the high 90s.
What?
So, and that explains everything we know about COVID over the past 2 years, really the past 15 years. The one was SARS-CoV-1. That the people that get sick and hospitalized from COVID are the ones that can't make nitric oxide. And who are those? Those are the elderly, African Americans, people that with underlying cardiovascular disease, high blood pressure, diabetes, smokers. It's that patient population that's nitric oxide deficient. And if you are nitric oxide deficient and you get exposed to COVID, the virus rapidly replicates, proliferates throughout the body. You get systemic disease, you lose oxygen saturation, you're in the hospital, you're put on a vent, and you die. Mm-hmm. And the simple fix to that is simply taking our nitric oxide drug, improving signaling, preventing vascular inflammation, improving oxygenation, and you kill the virus. In 2005, a paper was published showing that nitric oxide prevents coronavirus replication.
Wow.
So that's probably one of the most important aspects of signaling. But, the other aspects of signaling are, you said telomeres early on. Loss of nitric oxide production causes telomere shortening.
Really?
That's one of the signaling aspects, because you need nitric oxide that to transcribe and to make the telomerase enzyme, which prevents telomere shortening, it co-localizes with nitric oxide synthase. So if you can't make nitric oxide, you don't get expression of telomerase, you get telomere shortening. The other important component, which I think may be the most important, is stem cell function. Nitric oxide is what tells our own body and tells our own stem cells you need to mobilize and differentiate. If you have a cut or an injury, nitric oxide is the signal that says, hey, I've got an injury. We need to mobilize our immune system, increase blood flow to that site of injury, and we need to make new cardiac myocytes, for example, or we need to make new neurons because we had a stroke. And if you can't make nitric oxide, then the body doesn't get the signal to go there and repair any damaged tissue. So the result is you don't recover from injury. If you have a heart attack or stroke, typically you lose neurological function, you lose cardiac function, unless you do stem cells or you stimulate your body's own stem cells, and you can only do that through improvement in nitric oxide.
I really see an application for your drug for the emergency room. Someone comes in with a stroke, they just had one. It would make sense to give it to them. Someone just comes in having a heart attack, it makes sense to give it to them, right? You want to do everything you can to increase oxygen to oxygen-starved tissues because of the stroke or the heart attack. Of course, my goal in this podcast is to help people prevent illness in the first place and help people reverse illness wherever they are, whether they're in like early stage or even late stage. There's always, as long as your heart's beating and you're breathing and you're able to, take action for yourself, then there's hope, right? And there's things you can do to help your body heal itself. But even if someone were to go to the emergency room, if this was available to them, and they didn't know about, natural medicine, and then they got sick, that would be a fantastic just emergency in that moment medicine to help them have a better outcome. So I'm really excited for your drug. We're, as a society, we overuse drugs, but drugs aren't all inherently bad. There's some amazing life-saving drugs. And the problem is that if we only go to the kind of doctor that just throws drugs at you and doesn't help you change lifestyle and diet and doesn't actually look into the latest science of things, then we're just throwing a bunch of drugs at a problem that it might have been, a diet or nutrient deficiency or a diet problem or a lifestyle problem. So it's really good. My listeners knows, but maybe there's a few new listeners that haven't thought of it this way. You don't take your broken down car to a plumber. I mean, unless that plumber's a mechanic, right? So you take your car to a mechanic. Don't take your health always to the same doctor who only has a limited worldview on health, right? So if I remember, I'm from Canada, and I remember coming to the States, and I picked out what I thought was a good doctor. He was an osteopath. So I thought, okay, he's more holistic minded. This is back when I lived in Vegas. I lived in Henderson. And so I went to an osteopath, a really great guy. He was referred to me by my chiropractor's wife, who's a functional medicine practitioner, and she thought that this would be good. I go to him and I'm complaining about this pain in my ovary, and I'm like, I don't know if I'm having a cyst or what's going on. I just want an ultrasound. I just want to make sure everything's okay. I'm kind of nervous about it. And he walks into the office holding his prescription pad, writing a prescription for pain medicine, like as he's walking in. I'm like, I don't want pain medicine. I'm in pain, but that's okay because pain is like notifying me that there's something wrong, right. And I don't want to just. And from as a Canadian, it's harder to get pain meds. Just I don't know if it's different now. This was back in like 2008, but it's harder to get pain meds in Canada. But in the States, it was like, all I had to do was say I'm in pain, and they're like, oh, how many pain prescriptions do you want? I remember I went to a doctor in 2006 with a sore throat. It was just a sore throat, but I was like, it's kind of not going away. I just want to get it checked out. I'm feeling a little nervous about it. And this is before I was really into holistic health. She wrote me a prescription for some kind of like cough syrup that had a bunch of pain meds in it. I thought, this is crazy. Like, I've never taken a cough syrup with pain meds before. Of course, it numbed my throat and everything, but it's just this idea that we're over drugging ourselves. So we have to don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. If there's a drug and you're developing a drug, if there's a drug that can increase nitric oxide, that can save lives in the moment, that's amazing. And then, of course, in the long term, I'd love for everyone to learn what they can do is to increase nitric oxide in their lifestyle and their diet as much as possible. Like you've already mentioned, eating leafy green vegetables helps hugely. And making sure you're taking care of your oral microbiome. Don't do things that kill the microbiome in your mouth. So we've got two very easy to follow, very effective tips. Are there any other lifestyle tips for ensuring that the protection of our nitric oxide production, and in anything else we can do to enhance nitric oxide production?
Yes, there's lots, but let me go back because you made some very important points there. And interestingly, when I first filed the patents at UT, and I was on faculty at the medical school, so we had access to hospitals, to patients, and actually Jim Willerson, who was a famous cardiologist who unfortunately passed away last year, his idea was, well, let's use it for heart attacks. So if you've got what's called a STEMI patient, an ST elevated MI, which is an acute MI, then the problem is they have an acute obstruction in their coronary arteries. So we could dose them in the field, bring them back, and see if we could protect the heart from injury.
Yeah.
So it made perfect sense. But obviously that's a high risk patient population. People are going to die. And so we just made the decision, well, with this early technology, let's not put it in high risk patients. But you hit the nail right on the head, whether it's ischemic stroke or heart attack, then it's a very important application. But as you also said, prevention is much easier than treatment. So we have to address it before you have a heart attack. And then going back to drugs, I'm trained as a drug discovery chemist. That's what we're designed to do, was to understand human disease to the extent that we can rationally design drugs. My philosophy is much different than major drug manufacturers, because what they do is create a synthetic compound that's typically, probably 90% of the drugs out there are what's called enzyme inhibitors. They're preventing the activity of a certain enzyme. And that's called, pharmacology. And there's always consequences to that. And those are called side effects. Our body is not designed to inhibit an enzyme for the rest of our lives, which is what drug therapy does. What we've done is called restorative physiology. So we understand the enzymology of many different proteins and enzymes, primarily nitric oxide producing enzymes. We know what goes wrong in people, and we can restore the function of that enzyme. So in the drug therapy we develop, this is restorative in nature. It's not an inhibitor. It's basically giving back the body what's missing in terms of nitric oxide. So we know how much nitric oxide a healthy human makes, and we basically deliver that and recapitulate nitric oxide-based signaling in the human body. So drugs are anything that go through FDA-approved clinical trials and their prescriptions. So although we do have a drug discovery program and biotech company through Nitric Oxide Innovations, it's different than the drugs on the market. So for most people, and probably a lot of holistic people, drugs are a bad word. But what we're doing, it's really drug as intended. Give the body what it needs, the body heals itself. So that's kind of on our drug discovery platform, and trying to get these different drugs through FDA-approved clinical trial, which, by the way, is a very heavy lift, especially competing against people like Pfizer and Moderna and J&J, who have government employees doing their clinical trials for them. But you don't need that. Going back to what we can do to stimulate our own nitric oxide production or prevent the age-related decline, I tell people you do two things. You stop doing the things that disrupt nitric oxide production, and you start doing the things that stimulate it. So we can address both of those. So number one, if you're using mouthwash, we've already discussed that you have to stop. The evidence is clear. I was on the doctor's show last year where we revealed that mouthwash makes blood pressure goes up. Mouthwash, you lose the benefits of exercise. So if you're using mouthwash, you have to stop. Don't overtake antibiotics. Over 200 million prescriptions are written every year for antibiotics. If you got an active infection, antibiotics are very important. But don't overdo it, because you're killing the bad guys, but you're also killing the good guys. The other thing is fluoride toothpaste or fluoride rinses. Fluoride's an antiseptic, it's a neurotoxin, and it kills your thyroid function. So if you're using fluoride toothpaste, throw it away. Never buy fluoride toothpaste again. And there's a reason we have an epidemic of hypothyroidism. Fluoride competes with iodine binding to thyroid hormone. You can't convert T4 to T3 without iodine. Mm-hmm. Then the other thing is antacids. Over 200 million prescriptions are written for antacids every year, and that's not even counting the number of over-the-counter purchases. So you have to have stomach acid. Again, like Dr. Esselstyn says, take some apple cider vinegar before each meal, acidify the stomach, you get a better breakdown of proteins, you get your nitric oxide being produced. So those are the three things that will really make a huge difference in people's health. Throw out the fluoride, stop using mouthwash, and stop using antacids. So those are the three things you must do to get out of your body's way so it can make nitric oxide. And then do the things that stimulate. More green leafy vegetables, moderate physical exercise, get 20 to 30 minutes of sunlight a day. Or those of you that live in the north and there's long winters, you have to get an infrared sauna or infrared light.
Heck yeah. I have my sunlight and sauna, and it's the coolest thing ever. It's near, mid, and far infrared. Yep. And perfect. I feel like a new person. I love using it. I live out in the Pacific Northwest, and so it's like 4:30, the sun goes down at night and doesn't come back up till like 7:30. So we got those long winters, but I feel like a new person since I got that Sunlight and Sauna. I absolutely love it. I interviewed the founder of Sunlighten. Great interview. And she started the company because her brother was dying of cancer and doing everything he could to fight it, or maybe it was cancer. It was a few years ago they did an interview. I'm pretty sure it was cancer, but he was very sick. I can't remember what it was. It might have been cancer or it might have been like Lyme disease, but he was like basically laid out flat on the couch and he was super sick. And then he found out the infrared could help him and it gave him a leg up. And then she developed that company. It's all non-toxic. My listeners get a great discount when they check out Sunlight and Saunas, and I absolutely love Sunlighten and the sauna technology because now I know another reason why I love it. It increases nitric oxide production, or helps my body do that. So you talked about fluoride and chlorine, fluoride, and my question is, what about fluoride and chlorine in the water, in the drinking water? Yeah. We should do our best to drink water that doesn't have fluoride in it and chlorine. Does chlorine also affect nitric oxide? Because doesn't it also disrupt the microbiome?
Yeah, chlorine and fluoride, if you go back to the periodic table, these are a group of elements called halogens. So there's fluoride, there's chlorine, there's iodide, there's bromine, and I don't have it in front of me, but those are the major ones. So the biggest thing with fluoride and chlorine and chloride is they compete with iodine binding to thyroid hormone. So, most Americans are deficient in iodine, 95% of Americans, because the only dietary sources of iodine are typically seaweed or iodized salt. So we don't get enough iodine in our body, but yet we're exposed to fluoride in our drinking water, fluoride in toothpaste. So the problem is most humans have more fluoride and chloride in their bloodstream and cells than they do iodine. And those, because they're the same type of chemistry, the same properties on the halogens on that one row on the periodic table, they have similar functions and similar chemistry. So they act as competitors to binding of iodine to thyroid hormone. So you become hypothyroid. So I tell people everybody has to supplement with iodine because everybody's deficient in iodine. So going back to your question, municipal water is probably the worst thing in the world you can drink because not only does it have fluoride in it and chlorine, but it has drug metabolites in it, and it's just so you have to have a home filtration system to remove all these toxins from the water supply. And people think, well, it's bad to drink it. What's worse is it's bad to cook in it, but it's even worse to bathe in it because you're heating the bath water up to sometimes 104, 110 degrees, and then you volatilize the chloramines, and you basically inhale it. And you get better absorption transdermally and through inhaling it, the volatilized by heating the water, and people get sick and they get chronic illness. So you have to eat, drink, and bathe in good, clean water and not municipal water coming out of the pipes of major metropolitan areas.
I absolutely agree with you. I felt amazing when I used to live at a place with well water, and it makes such a difference to bathe in water and drink water and cook with water that is from the ground, that doesn't have any fluoride or chlorine or any chemicals in it. Oh, it's so good. I recently found a water filter that's affordable that removes everything. It's called Zero Water. I've been meaning to contact the company and see if I could get one of their science guys to come on and explain how it works. But it's better than any other filter I've found, and it's like $30, and it's just kind of, it looks, like any other kind of pitcher. They have the bigger ones. They have like a 23 cup one. That's the one I got. But it actually comes with a tester that tests total dissolved solids of parts per million, and sure enough, sets it to zero. And then they give you the little machine that tests the water for you, so that when it starts showing numbers on it, then to replace the filter. And it takes, for me, it was like about every 2 months I replaced the filter. But sure enough, it works as well as a $400, reverse osmosis, and it's only like $30. So that's my new find lately. I found it a few months ago, and the water tastes so good coming out of it. Now that we're living in a place that's with municipal water, I needed to find something better, even better than my Berkey. My Berkey wasn't removing everything, but this removes everything. So I thought that was really cool. You've given us so much information, and I keep thinking, well, you've created some products that we can use, because I'm going to do everything you said. And in addition to that, I kind of want to take it to the next level, and I'm like, I'm sure my listeners are the same, where they're like, well, but what else can I do? Like, okay, so you've given us the life hacks, the things that we can make sure that we're doing, which are simple enough. Clean water, clean toothpaste, no mouthwash, really take care of the microbiome and eat food, nice leafy greens, eat food that increases nitric oxide. But in addition to that, what else can we do to take it to the next level and really get the maximum benefit, considering that nitric oxide does so much more than I thought, that it helps, if it's helping with telomeres, it's helping extend life. It's helping literally tell your DNA to live longer. It's helping, and I heard you mention how it helps mitochondrial function, how it tells the cell. I don't quite understand exactly what you said and how it affects viral or suppresses viral production and bacterial production, but I did understand what you said, that it is definitely so fundamental to the immune system, that your immune cells help to make it, and that the signaling within the cells, the vasodilation, like there's so many aspects, and just that one point alone, that it increases oxygen, drives it deeper into the tissue, and sort of pushes back lactic acid. So just in that one thing alone, because when I go to exercise, I hate it when I'm just getting started and my muscles are already fatigued, already burning, and I'm like, man, I'm already anaerobic. Like, I look at my son who's about to be 7, and I just think, oh, I remember having energy for days. Like,
be that age.
Dude, I take this kid to play areas, and it's like I'm waiting for him to my butt gets numb or my feet get cold, or like something, like my body just like hanging out, like chilling with the other moms. I'm like waiting for my kid to get tired. And it's like 3.5 hours into a play area, and I'm like, okay, I'm kind of bored and cold and ready to go home, and he's just like, go, 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 go. And just to have that level of fitness again, anything to increase that ability to go longer, to feel like, you're 7 again. So tell us about the products you've created, and you've offered a fantastic discount to the listeners, which I'm so grateful for. You're giving us 10% off. Every little bit helps these days. The coupon code, of course, where everything, when I get a discount, we always like to ask the coupon code be LTH, as in Learn True Health podcast. So LTH is a discount. And then you have several websites, but you have told me that your the website that really is best for all our listeners to go to, and the easiest one, is N, like as in the letter N1, and then that is O1.com.
O1, yeah.
So N101.com. I'm sure there's a reason for that? I mean, is that the molecule, the nitric oxide
Yeah, it's
molecule? One,
one nitrogen, one oxygen. So
yeah,
NO. Yeah.
like H2O is water, so n101.com, and that's not the ones are not spelt out. It's just
Yes, the number there.
n101.com. Of course, the links to everything that we're talking about today is going to be in the show notes of today's podcast at learnthroughhealth.com. But when we go to n101.com, I was surprised about the products because the first thing I saw were some face creams. And I'm all about looking good, but here you are, a scientist about how to increase nitric oxide production. So let's just start with the obvious. What's up with the face creams?
Well, this has been an evolution. I've been doing this for 20 years, and as I mentioned early on, when we kind of solved the riddle of how to create nitric oxide in a safe and effective manner, it changes everything. And so when we started, in developing product technology, we first launched in the dietary supplement space, and then we said good results there. And then I get to think, well, what else is there? And so, people forget the skin's an organ. So just like the heart, if you have an interruption of blood supply to the heart, what happens? The heart fails. If you have a disruption in the blood supply to the brain, well, the brain fails. So just like any other organ, if you have decreased blood flow to the skin, what happens? It fails. And what does a failing skin look like? Well, you lose collagen, you lose hydration, fine lines and wrinkles start to appear, the skin hangs and droops, you get dermatitis, you get age spots, and that's aging. So what is the root cause of aging? Well, it's lack of nitric oxide production. So just as like we figured out how to deliver a solid dose form of nitric oxide in the form of a lozenge, we created a dual chamber serum that when you mix these two components together, so you basically take one pump from one side, one pump from the other, you mix it together, and the chemistry starts as normally would on the surface of the skin, and we generate nitric oxide gas. So then what you see, and this is the coolest show and tell in the history of any product technology, because most people, aesthetics and skincare is multi-billion dollar, and people buy a lot of stuff, and most cosmetic or skincare products are masking. They hide the blemishes, they hide the fine lines and wrinkles. They don't get to the root cause. So when you apply this to the skin, you'll see it turn pink. And what that is, that's the infusion of blood and oxygen to that area. So the nitric oxide is a gas. Part of it diffuses above the skin, but part of it diffuses into the dermis. And it opens up capillaries. It gets blood, oxygen-rich blood to those cells. And just like everything we've discussed, what does that mean? Well, you get oxygen nutrient deliveries. Stem cells begin to turn on, so you get regenerative new cells. So you slough off the old cells, you generate new cells. We do biopsies. We've seen improvement in collagen deposition. We've seen cellular hydration. Infections, whether it's some type of dermatitis or acne, we kill the bacteria. And fine lines and wrinkles disappear. So just like we can recover, or nitric oxide can make, a heart attack, where there's an injury or reduced blood supply to the heart, we can overcome the effects of loss of perfusion to the skin by providing a source of nitric oxide that the body otherwise wasn't making. And we've got 4 published clinical trials on that, and we see improvements from fine lines and wrinkles to scar remediation to acne to eczema, any type of dermatitis. Again, it doesn't mask. We're actually getting to the root cause of that underlying skin disorder, or just preventing the looks of aging. So that was the N101 serum, and then we created an entire line. We've got a glycolic wash that kind of helps remove the old cells because we're improving cellular turnover. So we got a glycolic wash that gets rid of the old cells so the new cells can come forward. We've got an eye cream and a face cream that contains peptides and growth factors. And it's really a remarkable system. And it's, as I said, you don't have to guess if this product is working. You can see it working right between your eyes, right before your eyes. And we call it the pink glow, the Pneuma glow.
Well, so it's helping increase oxygen to the cells that aren't getting enough oxygen, which is then all the cells are just functioning better. This sounds like the fountain of youth. This sounds like I'm just going to pour the fountain of youth on my face. I'm really excited about that. Luckily I don't have any major skin issues, but I hit my 40s now, and I want to prevent looking like a leather boot in 10 years. So I'm excited about that. I do have a little bit of rosacea, which my grandmother also had and my mom had. I'm not going to blame my genes. I'm sure that there's something I can do to change. I'm always figuring out things in my diet and my lifestyle that are to improve. But it'd be neat if it helped with that. And then I'm thinking, does it help reduce acne because the bacteria is anaerobic bacteria? The acne, the bacteria that causes, the bacteria that causes acne, is it basically killed because it's the tissue has more oxygen?
Well, it does two things. I mean, there's clear evidence of a mechanism of how nitric oxide kills bacteria. So it binds to the iron sulfur centers, which are the respiratory sites of bacteria. So basically, it suffocates the bacteria. So there's clear antimicrobial, antibacterial effects of nitric oxide. So in acne, it's doing two things. It's killing the active infection and the bacteria in the pustules, but it's also calming the inflammation and getting the blood supply there. So you basically shut down the immune response, because the immune system doesn't need to be activated if there's no bacteria there, because we killed it. And then you suppress the inflammatory response. And that's how you get rid of acne.
Does nitric oxide, I apologize if you said this before, I just really want to be clear about it. Does nitric oxide in every tissue of the body decrease the inflammatory response?
Yes, I mean that's part of nitric oxide's role. In an acute inflammation, whether it's an injury, whether it's a cut, or whether it's an exposure to an infection, an acute inflammatory response is absolutely necessary for our survival. And so part of that is mediated through nitric oxide. So you have to mobilize your immune system. You got to dilate the blood vessels, and then go and isolate that source of infection or injury to the immune cells, so they generate a lot of nitric oxide at the site of injury, and then that happens for 4 or 5 hours, and then the inflammatory cascade goes away. The problem is that in chronic inflammation, there's no off switch, and so what nitric oxide does, when you have, whether it's acute inflammation in the gut, whether it's ulcerative colitis or inflammatory bowel disease, or whether it's rheumatoid arthritis or lupus or any autoimmune disease where there's chronic inflammation, it shuts down systemic nitric oxide production. And so nitric oxide, one of its roles is to shut down the inflammatory response. In an inflammation, the earliest stages of that are what's called microvascular inflammation. So you get monocytes and neutrophils that stick to the lining of the blood vessel. They migrate through, they elicit an immune response, and that's the inflammation, oxidative stress, and immune dysfunction that occurs in every inflammatory condition. But if you restore nitric oxide production, primarily endothelial nitric oxide production, you prevent that entire inflammatory cascade. You suppress inflammation, you suppress the immune dysfunction, and you shut down the oxidative stress that's associated with all of those. In fact, one of my patents is on a method of reducing inflammation as measured by C-reactive protein. So when we improve nitric oxide production in the human body, we decrease C-reactive protein, which is an acute phase marker of inflammation.
That is so cool, because so many doctors say, well, inflammation is the root cause of the problem. It's like, no, we got to go deeper.
Inflammation is a consequence of loss of nitric oxide.
Right. And I've interviewed several doctors that say too much lactic acid is the cause of all disease. I'm like, no, it's so many, and it's like they all have a piece of the elephant, right? You've heard that, I don't know if it's a parable or whatever, but you've heard the story of all the 12 blind men are all touching a part of an elephant, and they're all arguing, like, no, they're trying to describe the elephant. Well, it feels large and leathery. No, it feels like a rope. No, it feels like a very thin, thing. No, it feels round, like a hose, right? And so each person's touching a different part of the elephant. We have to really be careful to not treat the smoke, but go after the fire. It's like, imagine imagine if every time we showed up to a fire, we saw firemen putting it out, and we're like, aha, firemen cause fires, because every time we see a fire, there's firemen. Or, oh, let's start treating the smoke. See, there's smoke, we should treat it. Well, get what's causing the fire, like, and how to put it out, right? So inflammation is a byproduct. Lactic acid is a byproduct. Where we need to keep going deeper. Yes, everyone wants to address decreasing inflammation. Everyone wants to eat a low inflammatory diet, doesn't want to do anything in your lifestyle or your diet that increases inflammation, just like you don't want to have too much lactic acid. And you want to make sure you have enough oxygen to your cells. This is all very important, but what is the root? Get to the root. And so we're seeing that nitric oxide is at the absolute root. We have to make sure we have enough of it, or else everything just becomes like the standard American statistic. One in 3 people are dying of something right now, and 70% of the adult population is on at least one prescription medication. So, I would say 70% of people in America probably have low nitric oxide, given what we're hearing today.
I would agree. Yeah, you made a very good point. I just want to expound upon, because I get questions sometimes, and people will, everybody's a researcher now. They can go to Google and put in, and they can find anything they're looking for. You can get the answer to whatever you're looking for, whether it's right or wrong. There's an answer out there. So people go, well, I've read a paper that says in chronic inflammation, nitric oxide is contributing to tissue damage during that inflammation. And so nitric oxide should be contraindicated in inflammatory disease. And if you read the literature, so in these scientific papers, they go, oh, well, we looked in lupus or Parkinson's disease or ulcerative colitis, and we find in the tissue, in the pathology reports, there's an increase in nitrotyrosine or peroxynitrite. So nitric oxide is causing that damage. And it's the exact same analogy you used. And I tell people, look, when there's a crime, police show up at the crime scene. But the interpretation isn't that the police caused the crime. Of course, nitric oxide is there in that inflammatory. That's its job. But because it's there, it doesn't mean that it contributed to the crime or caused the disease. It's there to clean up the mess. So you have to be careful on how you interpret data. And scientists are famous for this. You get the data, and there's a misinterpretation of the data. The data are the data, but most of the data out there can sometimes be misinterpreted, not only by the authors of the paper, but even by the people that read it. And so it's clear that low nitric oxide is bad, too much nitric oxide is bad. Too little water is bad, too much water. Obviously, if you drink too much water at a short period of time, you'll lyse cells and you'll die.
Right.
So everything in moderation. And so it's very, very important to realize that you have to figure out how to generate the right amount of nitric oxide at the right time in the right place. That's what we've been able to figure out over the past 20 years, and nobody else has been able to figure this out.
Okay, so that brings me to the question, how much nitric oxide is too much? How do we know if we're reaching toxic levels of nitric oxide? I mean, if you eat 4 cups of leafy greens a day, you're not going to kill yourself. But like if you try to eat, 4 grocery bags a day, you probably would explode. So could we get toxic with nitric oxide through you've got nitric oxide lozenges. I'm really excited about learning about that. That was my next kind of I wanted to explore that. But so we're going to do everything you already said. Eat healthy, make sure we're not killing our bacteria in our mouth. And of course, just under natural intervention, we wouldn't have too much nitric oxide. At least that's I'm guessing. You could let me know if I'm wrong. And then in addition to that, I want to increase my nitric oxide more. Let's say I want to take your lozenges. Could I become nitric oxide toxic?
Yes, so very good questions. But let me go back and hit on the point that you brought up earlier now again. So you mentioned green leafy vegetables and eating a good clean diet. Here's the challenge. And we did this and we published this in 2015. But we wanted to answer that same question you asked. How much broccoli or celery would I need to eat, or how much spinach would I need to eat in one serving to get enough nitrate in that food to normalize my blood pressure, to improve nitric oxide production? A very important question, because if we could answer that question, we could change dietary guidelines, We could get people off blood pressure medicine simply through a dietary intervention. And we could basically recapitulate Dr. Esselstyn's work in patients with full-blown coronary artery disease. And so in order to answer that question, we went to 5 different cities across the U.S., and we went to the same retail grocer, and we bought the same vegetables and brought them back to the lab, and we analyzed them. And what we found was pretty striking. We found that if you lived, for instance, in Dallas or Chicago, and you went to, it's called Whole Foods or some retail grocer, and you bought 6 stalks of celery and you consumed those 6 stalks within 20 minutes, then that would give you enough nitrate to normalize your blood pressure. If you lived in New York, you'd have to eat about 40 stalks of celery. So there's regional differences in the nitrate content of vegetables, and it's all across the U.S. We went to New York, we went to Raleigh, Chicago, Dallas, and Los Angeles. And there's as much as a 50-fold difference in the nitrate content of broccoli or celery in New York as there is in Dallas or Los Angeles. And it holds true for lettuce, spinach, every vegetable we measured. So the point of that is there's no way in hell we can make recommendations because it depends on where you live, how your vegetables are grown. Oh, and by the way, those were conventionally grown vegetables. We also compared it to organically grown vegetables and found that organically grown vegetables across the board have as much as a 5 to 10 times less nitrate than conventionally grown. And the variation is much higher, maybe 100-fold difference in nitrate content of organically grown vegetables from different regions of the U.S. So the point is you cannot eat enough, just like you can't eat enough cured and processed meats to get enough nitrate to lower your blood pressure. You can't eat enough organic vegetables to get enough nitrate because to have an organic label, you're not allowed to add nitrogen-based fertilizers to the soil. So as a consequence, the soils are nitrogen deficient. The vegetables that are grown in it don't accumulate nitrate. Without nitrate or nitrogen, they don't assimilate other vitamins and minerals. So organically grown vegetables are healthy simply by the fact that they're not exposed to herbicides or pesticides.
Right.
But they're basically depleted of most nutrients, including nitrate.
Wow.
So that adds another level of complexity to trying to do the right thing, but yet not getting what we are designed to do. And I've seen data that, since the 1940s, there's been a 90% decline in the trace minerals and nutrients in the food that's grown in the U.S.
Yes.
And so it's just, we're having to feed a growing planet, and that increased efficiency of food production has led to a decrease in nutrient absorption and assimilation, and we're producing a less nutritious product globally.
Exactly. And then we're getting all these nutrient deficiency diseases, and someone can be obese and nutrient deficient at the same time. And in fact, that's like one of the things one of my mentors, Dr. Joel Wallach, talks about is his first degree was in soil agriculture. And then he was a veterinarian, pathologist, research scientist, and later became a naturopathic physician. and I know, right? It's a kind of, he has a fun story. You should check out his story. But he saw early on like calf pellets of all these great vitamins and minerals, and he started eating calf pellets as a kid because he looked at the package and he asked his dad, why are we giving all these minerals and vitamins? And he's in his 80s, so this is like 70 years ago. Why are we giving all this nutrients? Why aren't we taking these nutrients? And then it was explained to him that, well, if we used human medicine, which is wait to get sick, then go to the doctor, take a bunch of tests, and be put on drugs, right? Human medicine. If you used human medicine for cattle, for beef farming, right? A steak would be $500 or $1,000. Right. Like a burger would be $50 or more. That's because it's a for-profit medicine, right? But with poultry, pork, beef, they need to keep the costs down while also keeping the animals alive and making big animals, right? So what do? They try to prevent disease. And they do that by making sure that there's, enough nutrition in their feed. And yet they don't make sure there's enough nutrition in our feed, in our food. Right. So Dr. Wallach jokes about it, but he says that, there's, in terms of the amount of nutrients your chickens are being treated better than you are. Like in terms of the amount of nutrition, the food industry is not interested in making sure you have 60 essential, meaning the body needs these things to function. 60 minerals the body needs, and there's 77 trace minerals and elements that we thrive on, but they're not in our food, and yet we're giving vitamins and minerals to animals just to help prevent disease and make nice big animals, so they can make a profit, which just drives me nuts hearing about that. Someone in Texas eat a few stalks of celery and lower their blood pressure and be great. But someone who's listening in Wisconsin or in Seattle or New York, or in a different country altogether might, no matter how many stalks they can seem to fit in their mouth, they're not really getting the results. And that's super frustrating. But that goes the same with selenium. People say, oh, I'm just going to eat Brazil nuts. Right. Well, the Brazil nuts have to be grown in selenium-rich soil. Just like, my iron is low, I'm going to have more spinach. I love spinach, but most spinach is hydroponically grown. It only needs NPK, water, and sunlight to grow. That can be completely void of 50 or more minerals. There doesn't have to be minerals in your food for them to grow food anymore. I mean, even look at like frankenfoods that are packaged foods, right? These foods don't have to have nutrients that your body needs, which now we know is like directly related to your nitric oxide production. Mm-hmm. So then what's the solution? I mean, obviously still eat a clean and healthy diet, try not to get pesticides and all that, but like growing our own food and making sure we put like blood meal or whatever has high nitrogen in the soil as we grow our own food. That would be one solution. But what's the solution for someone who is done feeling sick and wants the benefits that you spend like over 40 minutes talking about all the benefits of nitric oxide? Yeah. What's the solution? And if it is your lozenges, which you've created, the next concern is, how do I know what's the good amount to take? Because that person in Texas who's actually eating, just accidentally getting enough nitrates and nitrites to produce nitric oxide, they could maybe take too many lozenges versus someone in New York who could be taking too few. So how do we gauge this?
Yeah, it's a very, very good question, a very important question. And that's where the innovation comes in, because we realized a long time ago that very few people actually do, either through their diet or through lifestyle, are getting enough nitric oxide. So you almost have to have product technology. Like, you almost have to supplement with trace minerals and nutrients, which I do every day, because we're not getting it from our food supply. And, I live on hundreds of acres in Texas. We grow our own food. We raise our own beef and the food we eat. So even that we're still not getting all the trace minerals we need. So you have to supplement. So there's two main signs of toxicity for nitric oxide, and there's only two. So one is methemoglobinemia, which means that you take so much that you oxidize the iron in your red blood cells and you can no longer transport oxygen. So what that looks like is cyanosis. So people get blue around the lips. They can't, they basically suffocate. It's like cyanide poisoning. But you would have to take, 100 of those lozenges to see any changes in methemoglobinemia. The other is low blood pressure. So if you take too much nitric oxide, you'll see systemic vasodilation, and you'll see a drop in blood pressure. You'll get syncope, get lightheaded because you can't perfuse the brain just because of low blood pressure. And those are the only signs of toxicity based on the chemistry of nitric oxide. And so the trick has been, how do you restore? And again, the key word is restore. We don't want to give the body more than what it's used to seeing or what it would normally produce. And that's where we've learned over the past 20 years how much nitric oxide to generate over a certain period of time to recapitulate NO-based signaling. And the only way to do that is kind of through a lozenge, because we generate, if your body can't make nitric oxide, we do it for you. So that lozenge is designed to have a resident time of about 6 or 7 minutes. You put it in your mouth, it's activated by your saliva, and we're generating nitric oxide gas. And then that nitric oxide is absorbed in the oral cavity. It's oxidized to nitrite, it's transported, it binds to glutathione, and is transported as an S-nitrosoglutathione. And that extends the biological activity from 1 millisecond out to hours. And so we normalize. So again, through research, we know what normal plasma levels of these biomarkers are. We know what normal salivary levels of these biomarkers are, and we give back what the body's missing. So it's no different than anything else. If you're low in vitamin D, what do? You take vitamin D. Well, how do you know you have enough? Well, you go get your blood labs drawn, and if your vitamin D is 80, well, you know you're right on spot. So keep doing what you're doing. Same thing with this. There's no clinical measure of nitric oxide. Unfortunately, there's no labs that you can tell, like vitamin D or cholesterol or triglycerides. So what do we have to do? We have to test our saliva, which there's salivary test strips out there that I developed over 12 years ago. They can tell you what your nitric oxide levels are. Or the best measure is, check your blood pressure. It's easy. It's non-invasive, and you know if your blood pressure is normal. The beauty of what we do is, for instance, my blood pressure runs about 116 over 68 or 72. But when I take a lozenge, it doesn't drop my blood pressure. And that's called homeostasis. So if your blood pressure is high and you take it, it'll normalize it. If your blood pressure is normal or low, it won't further reduce your blood pressure. That's a very important safety aspect about what we do, because we don't want to lower blood pressure more in people with already low blood pressure.
Mm-hmm. And there are some people who have low blood pressure. And by the way, Dr. Wallach says that is the first thing he goes to is a calcium deficiency. That doesn't mean you go eat more dairy. You want to make sure you're getting an absorbable form of calcium that is usable to the body. I have a family member who was fainting from standing up. He was bedridden. This is just recently. He was bedridden. Tries to just stand up with a walker, and immediately his blood pressure drops so low that he is fainting. And so I gave him a liquid calcium and multi-mineral from takeyoursupplements.com, and I rave about them in so many interviews. And he within days is now able to stand without fainting. And that's so cool. I mean, there's other reasons that can cause low blood pressure, but that was like for him, that sometimes it's just the first thing you try when, like you hear some good information from a holistic doctor and you try it and boom, you get some results. And I just love that. Just like you, I'm so excited to get these lozengers, because I'm thinking to myself, so we used to be on for about 7 years. We moved last year, but for 7 years we were drinking nitrite. There was high levels of nitrates in our well water. And it wasn't high enough to cause like blue baby syndrome. That's sort of what I was concerned about, because I was concerned when my son was a baby. I was like, well, I'm concerned about that. But it was naturally high in our area, and there was no agriculture area. It was kind of weird. And I was concerned about it, but my husband's blood pressure was really under control in those 7 years, and he was getting nitrites. One of the sources was from our well water, because I would test it often, and it was high, and I was like high normal, like not dangerous, but still high. And so I thought to myself, that's interesting. Maybe think back. When we're cavemen, we're drinking water that naturally has nitrites in it, maybe because of the breakdown of stuff that, that's one of the reasons why it's in well water, is breakdown of vegetation and things like that. And now it can be dangerously high and toxic, because if you're getting unclean well water from that's been farmland is leached into it. But that's one of the sources that someone could get it from. So it's interesting. So I'm excited to get these lozengers, because I want to give them to my husband, because lately his blood pressure has been creeping up. It could also be from stress. We're under high stress right now, taking care of family members who are sick. And I'm just really excited. And I'm actually already on your website buying the lozengers right now. And I'm very excited to get him on it. And I will come back and share with the listeners after my husband takes it, and let them know what happens with his blood pressure. So and I'm going to take some too, and then go work out at the gym, and I'm going to let everyone know what I felt, if I noticed a difference in my ability to keep going at the gym, or if I gave up after 5 curl ups.
That's right. Yeah, no, look, this is an evolving science, and we've learned a lot over the past 20 years, and we continue to pivot and improve. But here's what we've learned over these 20 years is that nitric oxide is critically important, but it's not a silver bullet. It's not an end-all be-all cure-all. But what's clear is your body cannot and will not heal or perform optimally unless you have sufficient nitric oxide being produced. And I think, going back to what you said earlier with these mineral deficiencies, and, I've been in basic science now for almost 25 years, and what's clear to me is that people get sick for two reasons and two reasons only. And it doesn't matter if it's cancer, heart disease, Alzheimer's, diabetes, the body's missing something that it needs, or it's exposed to something that it doesn't need.
Mm-hmm.
And so in that model and in that paradigm, there's no room for drug therapy because, as I mentioned, if you're deficient in a mineral, you're going to get sick. So if we supplement and give back what's missing, and then we remove any toxin, whether it's fluoride or herbicides or pesticides or EMF or infections from root canals, if we remove the source of exposure of the toxin and then give back what the body's missing, the body heals itself. That's the only way people are going to get better. It's not through drug therapy. You're putting Band-Aids on and not getting to the root cause. So the end result of all that, whether you have you're toxic or you're mineral deficient, is it leads to a loss of nitric oxide production. There's reduced blood flow, increased inflammation, oxidative stress, and immune dysfunction. And that's the hallmark of every single chronic disease.
Fascinating. Do you have any information about cancer and nitric oxide?
Yeah, well, nitric oxide is known to regulate cell cycle and cell proliferation. But cancer, this goes back to the 1940s and what's called the Warburg effect, that cancer cells only respire and proliferate in a low oxygen, low pH environment. And so it's a mitochondrial disease. It's mitochondrial dysfunction. And so it's typically caused from some toxin. And so we've got to remove the source of, and this is what frustrates me about oncologists, is it doesn't matter if it's breast cancer, prostate cancer, or brain cancer. They only have three tools: surgery, chemo, and radiation. Mm-hmm. But the frustration is the oncologist never asked the patient, why did you get cancer? How can you treat something if you don't know why you got it? But they're throwing those three responses to every single cancer case that they see. And, nobody's ever been cured of cancer from surgery, chemo, or radiation. It's never happened. These people, may put them in regression, may extend their life, but it's never cured the cancer. There's never in the history of the world cancer being cured through standard chemo, radiation, and surgery, because they don't understand the etiology of the cancer.
Right.
What's poisoned the mitochondria to allow them to what's called anaerobic fermentation and to disrupt normal cellular metabolism? That's the root cause of cancer. We have to figure out what's poisoning the mitochondria, and it's usually some toxin. And usually it's a toxin from some infection that you have in the body, whether it's a viral infection or whether it's a bacterial, an asymptomatic bacterial infection in root canals. We're finding there's most solid tumors can be traced back to an infection in the root canal teeth. So you have to remove the source of infection, extract the root canal teeth, clean up the infection, and then support the body so it can basically heal and get some voltage and oxygen, increase pH, increase oxygen delivery. And you do that partly through nitric oxide. And then the body heals itself. So it's really very clear to me.
I love it. I'm so excited. I'm just so excited for what you're delivering today to the listener and how it could help them, those who are suffering with major disease, those who want to prevent major disease, those who want to reverse disease, or just those who just want to feel better. Just wherever they are, they just want to feel better. So I'm very, very, very excited. Okay. So it's when we start taking the lozenges, let's say we start slow. I'm going to take, one a day, see how it goes. Then maybe take one twice a day, see how it goes. Is there anything about body weight? Like would a 120-pound woman and a 350-pound man take different amounts?
Yeah, in terms of what we do, whether it's in dietary supplements, which the only thing we have to do is demonstrate safety. We can't make drug claims, but everything we do is tailored toward a 70 to 80 kilogram person, which 130 to 160 pound human, and that's kind of the benchmark. That's how drugs are developed. And so obviously, if you got if you're a 60, 70 pound kid, take half. If you're older than, or if you total body volume is more than that, then obviously the pharmacokinetics are going to be much different than in a 120 pound person. But I think the beauty of nitric oxide and what we do in that lozenge technology is give nitric oxide over a certain period of time, and people typically get the same response. So that doesn't mean that, a 240 pound person should put 2 lozenges in their mouth at one time. I wouldn't recommend that. I think, but we find that one lozenge, like for me, I'm 48 years old, of the vascular age of a 28-year-old. I'm in pretty good health. I don't have any issues, no blood pressure. My labs are actually very normal for a 48-year-old. So I take one lozenge a day because it just helps. It gives me that support I need. But I try to eat good. I go to the gym every day. I sit in an infrared sauna every day. I'm in a hyperbaric chamber every night when I'm at home. Although I'm not at home very much, I travel a lot. So I do all the things that typically my body needs to optimize nitric oxide production. So I don't need that much more help. But, everybody's busy. People don't always eat a good diet. And certainly most people don't have time or the discipline to go to the gym every day and get moderate physical exercise. Those are the people that need the most support, not us that are, health conscious and try to do the things, watch what we eat, and take on, the discipline to do the right things, even though it's hard work and it's very time consuming to stay healthy. But for me, it's worth it, because the last thing I want to do, if you're unhealthy, our health is our greatest asset. We can't enjoy life if we don't have good health. So it's worth the hard work, and your body will thank you for it.
If you have paid good money to buy a house, you have to replace the roof, every 10 years, unless you get one of those really cool roofs. It's like every 40 years. But still, you wouldn't, you've paid all this money, put all this effort into buying a house, paying off a mortgage. You're not going to let the roof rot, right? And then just completely destroy your investment and where you live. Your body is where you live. Yes, it's a pain in the butt to make lifestyle changes and make habit changes and make diet changes. And, the little brat, and like, I have a little brat inside me that she's like about 6, and she just wants what she wants when she wants it. She wants to go through drive-throughs. She wants to eat all the junk that they sell at the movie theater. Like, she just wants what she wants when she wants it. And that's she wants that dopamine spike. She wants all those feel-good chemicals that happen in the brain when she gets her way and gets to eat fried food, sugary, greasy, whatever kind of food, right? We all have that brat inside of us that is a drug addicted to processed food, that wants that rush, right? Now, some people it's potato chips. Some people it's fast food. Some people it's alcohol, right? The alcohol, that is something that I bet decreases nitric oxide production. Like, I'm just going to guess. Am I right? Does it have any effect on nitric oxide production?
Well, it does, but interestingly enough,
you're about to tell me it increases it, aren't you?
Yeah, we published, there was data from probably 15 years ago. Moderate alcohol consumption is cardioprotective. So meaning that there's observational data that if you have a heart attack after 1 or 2 drinks, the heart suffers less injury from that heart attack than people who say didn't have a drink. And so mechanistically, we know that if moderate alcohol consumption upregulates an enzyme called alcohol dehydrogenase, then also its cousin aldehyde dehydrogenase. And then those actually extend the biological half-life of nitric oxide.
Oh, you're so funny.
But that's moderate. Gosh. It's called ethanol preconditioning. But again, there's a very narrow opportunity there to do that. So, you can quickly overdo it, and then you overburden the liver, and then you upregulate P450 enzymes, and it leads to a number of problems. But moderate alcohol consumption is actually cardioprotective.
That's so funny. But you had to have just had those 2 glasses of wine and then have a heart attack. You can't like you can't have had 2 glasses of wine yesterday and have the heart attack, right? You're saying it's just after moderate alcohol consumption?
That's right.
Everyone's gonna be walking around with a glass of wine, like I'm just gonna sip on this just in case.
Right.
Moderately protective of my heart. What's better is eating super clean, super healthy, getting some good nitric oxide, and let's prevent damage to our heart by preventing heart disease in the first place. It's been so much fun having you on the show. I'm really excited to dive in, and also you have this great book on your website. So when listeners go to, it's really easy. Your website's very clean. It's not cluttered. N101.com. There's the cool skincare stuff. There's the little lozenges, and then there's your book. So very simple. Tell us about, to wrap it up, just tell us about your book. What would we get out of your book more than what we got today in this great interview? Like, what more would we get if we got your book? Or should we even get your book? Is your book something we should dive into?
Well, look, I mean, this has kind of been rapid fire, and this is, 30 years of research kind of distilled down into 90 minutes or less. And so most people learn through repetition. And so the book is really, it's called Functional Nitric Oxide Nutrition. And it basically distills down a very complex, complicated science into a story that's easily digested and easily understood. Hence the pun and digested, because it's about nutrition and how you can use diet and lifestyle to restore your nitric oxide production. So it's an easy read. It's about an hour and 15, 20 minutes, depending on how fast of a reader you are. But I think it's a good reference because you can go back and then, mark pages, and over time, this is all going to make sense to you. You can employ these simple strategies and, start to see changes in your own health and wellness. And,
what I'm seeing now is nitric oxide. You're like Joseph in the Technicolor Dreamcoat. You're like way ahead of your time, right? Like, that song that's like he was way ahead of his time. This is like the early pioneering stages. Think back to 100 years ago when they would just discover something about health. It's like, oh my gosh, there's this thing called vitamin C. It's amazing. We just discovered this. And now look, today we kind of take it for granted. We take vitamins for granted. But when they were first discovering prevent scurvy and all these other diseases, this is amazing. Vitamin C, it's revolutionary, right? And now, I mean, we take it for granted, but 100 years from now, everyone's going to be like, go get your nitric oxide checked. Like, what's wrong with you? You're completely low in nitric oxide, oh, you're low in vitamin C, go get some. So even though this is all sounding very new to us, 100 years from now, it's going to be like, no duh, right? Like, of course, we need nitric oxide. This is clearly something, your lozenges are going to be on every shelf. It's going to be very, needed and also common, but right now it's not common because it's just this groundbreaking field that's growing. So I'm very excited to see the body of work as the science dives deeper into understanding human physiology and how to support the body in reversing and preventing disease. I love that we can do so much of it from diet and lifestyle, but also understanding that our diet is compromised. It doesn't mean that you just give up and go to McDonald's. Our diet is compromised because even no matter how healthy you eat, our farming practices over 100 years have really messed up our food. So if you can grow your own food, great. If you can make a relationship with a farmer and that grows really clean, healthy, and remineralizes the soil and uses a nitrogen-based fertilizer, awesome. Eat that food too. Definitely check out the website of Dr. Nathan Bryan, which is n101.com. Use the coupon code LTH to get the awesome stuff. I'm going to share my results, like I said, as I go forward using your stuff, and check out the book. I love the idea that repetition, taking your 30 years of work and accumulating it down to something that we can understand and absorb, and then really take that to heart, because this is the root. This is something so important. I don't want to overlook that this is, if we can increase nitric oxide to healthy levels, we can have a healthy immune system, healthy cardiovascular system, healthy mitochondria, healthy signaling in the body. The list went on and on and on, and you guys are still discovering more benefits to it as well. Is there anything you'd like to say to wrap up today's interview?
No, I think just to touch on what you said, we're way ahead of our time. Nitric oxide is today where fish oil was 30 years ago. And now fish oil is ubiquitous. I mean, everybody knows
Right.
the benefit. Most people supplement with it. But no, I think, look, the science is very clear that your body cannot and will not heal without nitric oxide. And so we have to start employing strategies and understand what are we doing on a daily basis that's disrupting our body's ability to produce nitric oxide. We got to stop that and then start doing the things that are clinically proven to promote it. I will share, I got an educational website. I'm not a big promoter of products. I'm more of trying to provide education and awareness so your listeners and you can make informed decisions. And so I've got an educational website called drnathansbryan.com. There's a 6-minute video on there. I do a monthly blog. Try to provide some timely and practical tips that people can employ and hopefully learn something. And then they can follow me on Instagram, drnathansbryan.com, or LinkedIn.
Love it. And of course, the links to everything that you just mentioned are going to be in the show notes of today's podcast at learntruehealth.com, or in the description, wherever you're listening from. It's been such a pleasure having you on the show. Please come back on the show when you have more breakthroughs. We'd love to be updated as you continue to just innovate and dive into this. When your drug is full, all the testing is done, all the studies have been completed, and it's now approved for FDA use. I'd love to also hear more stories about that. Again, I'm not a fan of drugs, but I'm a big fan of drugs that'll save someone's life. I'd rather you be on a drug and alive, right? So,
That's
but
right.
if we can save your life with a drug, and then let's do everything we can to get you healthy again, fantastic. Or just do everything to get you healthy so you don't need the drug. But I'm so glad that emergency medicine is available to us. It just shouldn't be the only medicine we go to. We don't want to wait until we get sick and then go to the emergency room. Let's do everything we can to prevent never having to go in there in the first place. But still, when your drug is totally approved and and available in ERs, I'd love to have you back on the show to hear more about the studies and the success and the results. And of course, with anything that you're innovating around this, please come back. We'd love to hear more.
Great. Thank you so much.
I hope you had a fantastic time listening to today's interview. Wasn't that mind-blowing? Well, look forward to the next few interviews, because I have some more mind-blowing, fantastic interviews coming up in the pipeline. I want to make sure that you know to go to Dr. Nathan Bryan's website and use the coupon code LTH, as in Learn True Health, for the amazing discount that he's giving all the listeners. And you can go there by going to n101.com. And of course, look for the show notes of today's podcast at learntruehealth.com to get all of the details of all of the links for Dr. Nathan Bryan. And please come join the Facebook group if you haven't already. It's a very supportive group. We've got thousands of listeners there who love asking questions and answering them and sharing their information and sharing, their experiences and their testimonials. And then, of course, you can use the search function in the Facebook group. We've had the Facebook group for years, so you can use the search function and dig through and read so many resources. There's so many wonderful resources in the Facebook group. And you might not know this, but you can go to learntruehealth.com, my website, and use the search function there as well, because we're coming up on 500 episodes soon, so we have a lot of resources there, and you can read the transcripts of the interviews as well, should you want to peruse through other topics. We cover everything from emotional health, mental health, spiritual health, energetic health, and of course, physical health. Even episodes on lifestyle and improving, building healthy habits that stick, and decreasing anxiety, all kinds of wonderful topics to explore at learntruehealth.com. Thank you so much for being a listener, and thank you so much for sharing this podcast with those you love. My goal is to help as many people as possible to learn true health. Our suffering is not mandatory. Suffering is optional, and that's what I want, is to help people who are suffering. Like I suffered for so many years because the doctors I went to didn't have the tools to help me, and the doctors on my show, the holistic doctors, they have the tools, they get the results. So I bring people on the show who get results so that you don't need to suffer anymore. So your mom, your dad, your sister, your friends, your children, they don't need to suffer anymore. And it's just a matter of finding the information, finding the right doctors, and applying it to our lives. And that's why I'm so grateful that you continue to share my podcast with those you care about, because together we can help end suffering. Suffering shouldn't be mandatory. It should be optional. There's so much information out there. People have reversed diabetes, reversed cancer, reversed heart disease. People have reversed things that they've suffered from, reversed depression, addiction. They have done that, and we can help those we care about. We have the resources. So I suffered for so many years until I found holistic medicine and applied it to my life and found the doctors that help. And that's why I'm doing what I'm doing, because we can take this information out to those we care about and help them to heal and help them to no longer suffer as well. So let's end the suffering of those we care about. Continue to share this information. And if you have any feedback, if you have any doctors you want me to interview that have really helped you, I'd love to hear from you. Come join the Facebook group and let me know. And also just feel free to email me, Ashley@learntruehealth.com. Would love to hear from you. Thank you so much, and enjoy. Have just a wonderful rest of your day.